let's build a bumper.
I live inside my own world of make-believe. Kids screaming in the cradles, profanities. I see the world through ice covered in ink and bleach. Cross out the ones who heard my cries and watched me weep. I love everything. Fire spreading all around my room. My world's so bright, it's hard to breathe, but that's alright. Hush. Take my eyes open to force reality. Why can't you just let me eat my weight in glee? I live inside my own world of make-believe. Kids screaming in their cradles, profanities. And some days I feel skinnier than all the other days. Sometimes I can't tell if my body belongs to me. I love everything. Fire spreading all around my room. My world's so bright.
So just like my rear bumper a couple of weeks ago, I want to do the same thing with the front bumper, where essentially I sold the one that I had on it, and I'm using that money to build a new tube one. So I'm pretty excited. I like how the whole Jeep is just being covered in tube now, kind of more like buggy-esque. So everything kind of matches, and I was kind of excited to do like a little different style on the front of this bumper. So we've kind of mocked up the main tubes here and gotten our main shape, and I'm pretty excited. I think it looks pretty sweet so far. So now the next thing is I do need to go ahead and mount the winch plate in the bottom so I can get the mount like legitimately situated, and then I can kind of make sure all the other tubes that I build actually fit around the winch and don't interfere with it. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut out some 3/16 plate, lay that down, and burn it on, and then we'll get to work on the rest of these tubes. Alright, we're back. It's a new day, and we got the majority of this bumper done pretty quick, just like in an afternoon. So, way better than plate bumpers like that Coastal Off-Road. But I'll show you guys what we have, and then I'll show you guys what we have left, and we'll kind of go from there. So here's the main bumper structure. So pretty happy with how it turned out. The stinger, I don't know if I totally love it, but I made a couple of them, and this was the best one so far, so I'm sticking with it. The next thing is I need to add two things. So first off, I need to add a support tube to these corners so I don't hit them and they bend in. And then also, there's only one point of support connected to the frame right now. So we need somehow to tie this bumper into a higher location on the frame support. So what we're going to do to accomplish that is we're going to take a bent tube that's going to mount right here, come up and through this plate, and then land out on the corners. Then this thing will be absolutely beef. So I've got some scrap over here that I bent for something else that didn't end up working out. So, and it looks about right. So I'm gonna cut this up and start mounting it in here, and we'll get this thing all knocked out. Alright, so we got this thing mocked up as much as I need to do on the car. I'm tired. I can see my face is dirty right now. And I'm not going to lie, there's definitely a couple of gaps between some of these tubes I'm just going to fill with weld. They're not super structural, so I'm not worried about it. But honestly, I'm tired. I'm kind of over this thing, and I want to knock it out. But, I mean, it really didn't take too long. We're at like a day's worth of work total on this thing. So, yeah, time to now go ahead and yank this thing off. Finish weld it, and then my buddy Alex is coming over, and we're going to finish up the tube bumper on his, and hopefully we can go wheeling next weekend. So, we'll see. Alright, so I got the bumper all done. I was really stoked with how it turned out, and then I started looking at it and realized I forgot to put a spot to mount these pod lights. And unfortunately, I made the bumper really tight to the body and really tight to the winch because I wanted a really good approach angle, and I realized I really didn't leave anywhere for these lights. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to mount some pod lights across the center here. I kind of played around with putting them a little narrower or a little wider and having two. And I think, honestly, it's going to look better if I have 4 across the front. So, hit up my friends at Auxbeam. I think they're going to send out a couple more lights so we can get this thing set up. I did think about not running the lights, but these things are so bright and they are so nice off-road driving. I know in previous videos I've said a lot of times that I'm not driving fast in this thing and I'm not really worried about that. But honestly, lately, that skinny pedal has become a lot more fun. And especially at night, it is really nice to throw some light way far out so you can see what you're coming into way before you get there. So I know it's not going to fit perfectly with the aesthetic of the bumper, but I've got a little bit of strap steel here, and I'm going to go ahead and whip up a bracket to be able to hold 4 of those pod lights on the front, and then finally we can get to painting. And with the painting, I know that I talk about that Rust-Oleum brush-on hammered paint a lot that I really like. And I never really show the painting process. So I think in today's video, what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna go through that process with you guys. Honestly, I normally don't like using my nice camera when I'm painting in the garage. So I'm just gonna grab an action camera, bring that out and kind of go over the paint to show you guys this Rust-Oleum hammered paint. It's a long process, but honestly, it turns out fantastic. So anyways, let's go ahead and start whipping up some brackets. Alright, so I got ratchet straps for my rafters coming down to the bumper. I like to put it kind of at chest height so it's easy not only to paint the top, but having to get underneath to paint isn't too bad. I normally hang stuff up with a little bit of welding wire. So this is just a cheap, easy way to hang stuff up. And it's not that big, so there's not that big of an area that I'm not going to be able to paint. Also, it's hung up behind the fair lead, so like if this messes up the paint pulling this off, this is all going to be covered. Doesn't really matter. And that welding wire is going down onto some washers on the underside. So now let's start on prep. So I'm going to grab some acetone and we're going to wipe this whole thing down. All right, now once that flashes off, it's time to come in and do some primer. If we were doing a real fancy paint job, you could take like a tack rag and go over there and that gets all little particles of dust and stuff off. Off-road bumper, not worried about that. So primer I like to use is the Rust-Oleum professional grade primer. The stuff works really well, it lays down really even. So we're gonna go ahead and spray this thing and we'll let that flash. Safety third. All right, so we got that bumper sprayed. Went ahead and did the first coat, wait 15 minutes, hit it with the second coat. Then I like to wait about 45 minutes for that to flash off. And now it's time to top coat. So this is the Rust-Oleum hammered paint. Like I said, this is the black. It dries to like a dark gray, like gunmetal gray. But the perks of this stuff, one, it is super thick, so it's super durable. Two, since it is so thick, it does hide a lot of imperfections in the metal. So if you have little areas with dents and dings, it covers those up really easily. It dries with a texture. It's like a golf ball, like dimpled texture. So that way when you need to touch it up, like if you smash the bumper into something, you can come back and you can touch it up really easily, and the texture like hides where the paint starts and finishes. So when we open it up, this does have a lot of metallics in it, and there's the chemical that makes it the textured. So definitely important to mix this stuff up super good. Then so for paint brushes, so you go to Home Depot, right? This is like the cheapest chip brush that you can get. These I don't really like because these bristles break off really easily and you'll get some of the bristles in the paint. These guys, the next one's up. I think these are like $1.50 or $2 a piece. These work really well, and these guys don't lose any bristles. But since this is my bumper, I really don't care too much about it, and I need to get rid of this brush, so I'm just gonna use this one. If I was doing this for somebody else setting up a bumper, I would definitely use the nicer brush. But if I get 1 or 2 bristles in the paint, whatever, this thing's gonna get smashed in anyways. All right, so painting this stuff, it is super thick sludgy. So when you go to apply it, you want to go pretty liberal on the brush, but we don't want to drip it all over the floor. Go ahead and just slap down a big section, right? And then you're going to go through and thin this out. So it does brush on relatively easily, and I hope this camera's picking it up, but if you brush too hard, see, you can see the brush strokes through, and that's why I like to use a lighter primer so you can see where you're covering. You might get some drips, again, just kind of work those out. But you want to lay it on just thick enough to where you don't see those brush marks, but not so thick to where it drips. So I do like to start going pretty heavy with it in the center, and then I'll use that excess paint and kind of brush it into all my corners. So as I'm brushing here, hopefully you guys can see in the camera, but it's already starting to dimple and become its final texture. So it is really important. You always want to keep your edges wet as you move out, and the direction of your brush strokes really doesn't matter because the brush strokes are going to be covered up by how the dimple begins in the paint. So I can see I have a couple drips there, so I'm just going to kind of like spread those out. But yeah, that's the other perk of this paint is you don't have to be super specific with how you brush it on, because once it dimples, it's going to hide all your brush strokes and all that good stuff. Alright, so we got our first coat done here. So you can see the texture is already starting to develop a little bit. I know this is bad camera for it, but inside the dimples, you might see a little bit of gray primer. And that's because as it's doing its dimpling job with whatever chemical that is, it's gonna soak down into that primer. So that's another thing to note on here. So your first coat is gonna take a long time. So this bumper isn't huge, and this was like about 45 minutes of brushing this paint on. And the reason for that being is that primer is very like porous and rough, which is great because it provides a great surface for this paint to bond to, but you really have to brush it into all those cracks and crevices. But anyways, it's going ahead and texturing, and it's already kind of tacking up in areas that I started on. So now I'm gonna give it about another 45 minutes before I come back with the second coat. And the nice thing about doing the second coat is it goes much faster. Now that it has a nice slick surface on the top of it, the paint really glides across all of it. So normally the second coats of this stuff takes me about half the time to apply as the first coat. Another quick thing, I don't know if you guys saw me switch from the Solo cup to the paint can in my hand. The Solo cup melted in half. But yeah, pro tip, don't use Solo cups for hammered paint. All right, so we got this thing all painted up. Kind of like last tip on this too. The second coat, I really go heavy on. So I really load the brush up, slather it on there. And then like I mentioned before, since it's already coated once, it does spread out a lot easier. You know, less physical force on the brush, and it seems to go a little bit longer. But I do a really thick coat, and the reason for that is the thicker the coat, the thicker the dimples will be. So for instance, you can buy this hammered paint in a spray can, and I use that to like touch this stuff up sometimes. But the spray can, since it goes on so thin, the dimpling and the texture of it is very, very thin. And also you gotta do, I mean, this stuff is probably as thick as doing like 10 coats with the spray can, brushing it on, just because it's like thick and sludgy. It's kind of like single stage tractor paint that you can slap on there. But by getting it really thick, these dimples on here can form almost like twice to 3 times as thick as it can with a spray, which I prefer the texture of that. And then lastly, I mentioned that I had some potato welds on here. This is the big perk of the hammered paint, is it still looks like a potato weld, but it's a little less noticeable. But overall, yeah, we got this thing all painted up and pretty stoked on it. So, and now the last thing on here is, now that it's done painted, it takes like at a minimum 48 hours to dry. So I'm gonna let this sit here for a couple days. We'll come back and see how it is. So we let the paint dry on this bumper. I didn't let it dry as long as I should have. My recommendation for this paint is not to touch it for at least like 48 hours, but I was kind of in a rush. I only waited about 30 hours maybe, and I went ahead and installed it. And while doing that, got like, you know, a couple finger marks in it, like smudges essentially when you kind of press down on the paint. But overall, I think it turned out sweet. So I'm really happy with like all the lines on this bumper. You know, I know the XJs are really boxy, and I didn't want to do this tube bumper like too swoopy. But I think it kind of gave a nice little contrast. And the biggest thing I'm excited about now is that the whole XJ is tube. So I think it looks really nice having tube front bumper, tube rear bumper, the full cage. The last thing I kind of want to do is just paint the sliders in that same paint. So the Jeep is black, and then you have all the accents in that like gunmetal gray, which I think looks awesome. But yeah, overall, really happy with it. You guys might notice I am up in the mountains now, and I'm about to test it out for the first time. So we tossed it on, set some lights up, and the lights on there, those are from Auxbeam. Those are like the X Pod lights. Those things are bright as hell. I used them driving in here last night. They're absolutely fantastic. And I'll get you guys some cooler shots of those out on the trail. But yeah, highly recommend. They are super bright. So far, the ones that I've had for like over a year have been super durable. And for the price, I mean, you really can't beat them. So we are up in the mountains. We're gonna go wheeling for 2 days. And I know a handful of you guys have been asking for wheeling videos. So here it is, gonna film a couple days up here with some friends and see what we get into. So anyways, guys, thanks for watching Machines Inc. If you guys like this bumper, let me know down below in the comments. And if you guys wanna see some wheeling videos coming up, stay tuned.